Well, good evening. Welcome to Yada Yahowah Radio. We've got a couple of items in the news before we begin this evening. First, is something that I never thought I would actually hear. We've talked a lot about it on this program. But Janet Yellen, who is Secretary of the Treasury, actually admitted that the dollar's position as the international reserve currency is not only subsiding, but that it will continue to degrade, and that there will be negative consequences, severe negative consequences associated with it. She is very candid, said, listen, it's not easy for countries to get around the dollar, but they will all continue to diversify. The value of the dollar will decline. There will be economic issues associated with that, and that in the last year, 2022, the dollar lost 8% of its holdings worldwide as a reserve currency. You know, you can't lose 8% a year very long before you're no longer the reserve currency.
Yeah.
And you know, that's the purpose of BRIC, to get around it. When we put sanctions on Russia, when we started all sorts of challenges against China, we have pushed the world away from using the dollar as a reserve currency. I would tell you that if a deal is done with Saudi Arabia, which is being done under the guise of normalizing relationships with Israel, and Israel would be the ultimate fool to accept normalization with Saudi Arabia, not because MBS has ulterior motives as it relates to Israel, but the issue is the United States is being blackmailed essentially by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has now a larger customer in China than the United States. It has access to weapons from both Russia and China and from France. It is beginning to do business in currencies other than dollars. And it is very likely to join BRIC. So when Biden started to really upset MBS in terms of his attitude, MBS basically said, you cannot push us around anymore. We are not your vassal. So just go away. And that's when they normalized relationships with Iran through China. But now what they're essentially doing with MBS's plan is he wants several things. He wants a NATO-type agreement with the United States, that the United States will go to war on behalf of Saudi Arabia, no matter who attacks Saudi Arabia. Now, this is the nation most responsible for 9/11. And MBS has put America in a position where rather than it holding Saudi Arabia accountable for doing that, it is going to do just the opposite. He has the United States agreeing to defend Saudi Arabia using U.S. military forces if it is attacked. Second, while MBS has and Saudi Arabia has access to nuclear bombs, they don't have as much access as they would like to the enrichment of uranium to make as many bombs as they would like. They financed the Pakistani program, and as the quid pro quo for doing that, they were given a nuclear arsenal. But they want, and they have the money for a much larger one. And the way that you go about that is to refine uranium, and the best way to do that is to have nuclear reactors. And so as part of this deal, they're requiring the United States to build nuclear reactors in Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia does not need nukes to boil water. A nuclear reactor, all it does is uses uranium enriched to a fairly low degree to heat up and boil water. When you float on natural gas and oil, you do not want to spend the kind of money to build a nuclear plant to boil water when you're actually burning up some of the gas just because the byproduct has no use to you. So the only reason to have it is the daughter products of a nuclear plants can be further refined to make nuclear bombs. So that's another negative issue. And then Saudi Arabia wants another $100 billion worth of advanced U.S. weapons. And then there is, to give cover for this, rather than appear like, well, we just got blackmailed, which is what's really happening, it's being marketed as normalization with Israel. Since it's not really normalization with Israel, Israel is not a party to the discussions, and the Biden administration has told Israel, you will not criticize anything we're doing. You may not comment on it. We're not going to even tell you any of the conditions of the covenant, of this agreement. So Israel's not even a party to it, even though it's being positioned as the normalization with Israel. That is a complete lie, and unfortunately the press is buying it, is eating it up. Now, just to tell you that terms with Saudi Arabia would be untenable for Israel, last week Saudi Arabia announced that they were sending a full-fledged ambassador to the Fakistinians, and that they wanted to put the Fakistinian ambassador in an embassy in Jerusalem, which they view as part of the Fakistinian territory. Now, that's a total non-starter. Israel cannot, not tomorrow, not any time in their future, cannot acquiesce to a two-state agreement. Right. They tried that with the Oslo Accords, and it proved to be disastrous because the Muslims continued to hate and terrorize Jews. It's an absolute unmitigated disaster what happened with Oslo. And that was, the idea was giving the Palestinians areas that were carved out of Israel for them to have total autonomy. They could do everything except have a military there, and it would be the Israeli military that would have sanction over those areas. They call them occupied, and yet every time Israel has to go in there to quell an act of terrorism, Israel is going in and coming back out, which means they aren't occupying it. And you look at Gaza, which Bush made them give up. Look what happened with Gaza. And you want Israel now to give up even more land and to give up the right to go into that area to rid it of terrorists? It's the most insane idea in the world, and that would be part of it. So if Israel does this, you could kiss it goodbye. But Israel is in a death spiral at the moment. The Haredim now have told Netanyahu, pull off of judicial reform. We don't really care about judicial reform because it doesn't pertain to us anyway, because we don't pay any attention to any of the rulings of that secular court. We're insulated with our own rulings, and all we want is an absolute guarantee that our Haredim will not be drafted into the IDF. And that's the thing that's made Israel special, because this really tiny country surrounded by 101 Muslims that hate them is able to defend itself because everyone serves. Right. Everyone serves, including women. And yet the Haredim want the lone exception, and they want to be paid and to have an exception for studying in their yeshivas, which all they're doing is getting religious indoctrination. Plus, they want the state to fund their schools, but in their schools, they do not teach English, they do not teach the sciences, they do not teach math. And so those who go to those schools, all they know is how to be controlled by the rabbis. They're not marketable. They can't work for a living. So they're dependents upon the state. And when the Haredim were supposedly negotiating for this most recent bill, they said, drop judicial reform and pass a bill that exempts the Haredim from IDF service. And when it said, well, why don't we, just so we don't have a civil war here and to have the entire country come down on you and hate you, why don't we say that you can be and you would be drafted on non-IDF things that were beneficial to the country. So it's 2 years of service, even if it isn't in the military. And they said, absolutely not. And I said, unless you do this, we will leave the coalition and then bring the government down. what I would have done if I were Netanyahu is I would have said, okay, go ahead. Right now, you have a prime minister that will listen to you and will tell you that what you're asking for is suicidal, and yet he will do the best he can to carve out monies for you and protections for you. But if you bring this government down, you're going to have a secular leftist government where you will have absolutely no say, and the very first things that they will do is they will eliminate all of the benefits that you have elicited under me. So if you think that playing blackmail with me and threatening me in this way is going to prevail, try it. Because I'm not going to allow you to commit suicide through me. But Netanyahu didn't have the courage to do it. I don't know what happened. This was a man at one time that had some compunction, but he seems to have lost it. And so that's a very sad situation that is happening there.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
America's sitting on more oil than anyone in the world.
Yes.
That's not debatable.
Right.
You want to play money wars? What's valuable? We have oil. The thing that made them valuable is they have oil in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. Why don't we go and compete with them? Why don't we get rid of this government and put one in that knows what oil's worth and let them pump it and let them have a pipeline and all that stuff?
Oh, of course. Yeah. If you put the pipeline from Canada with all of their shale oil, and you drill in the Gulf of Mexico off the California coast and off in the Gulf of Mexico and off the eastern U.S., and if you built pipelines across the U.S. to transport gas, which America is exceedingly rich in gas, and gas is very friendly environmentally.
Right.
And if America, rather than giving away nuclear reactors, actually built them in the United States, we would be importing gas, and Saudi Arabia couldn't blackmail us. Now, that's the bottom line. But the Biden administration has played this stupidly and has curtailed drilling, curtailed pipelines. And so we're now in a situation where, for example, we should have been drilling in Anwar. And, fossil fuels are what we have for transportation, and it's what we have to generate energy. There are ways to even generate electricity via coal now with very minimal environmental degradation. But we are committing suicide ourselves. So it's not just the Haredim and Israel that are committing suicide. So are we in America. There was an amazing speech that took place this week by a guy I've always disliked. And I've always realized this guy epitomized everything that I disliked about the U.S. military. I think he was at one time a four-star general. He became an advisor to, I think even as high as national security advisor under the Trump administration. He is a wing Christian wacko. His name is Michael Flynn. He gave a speech this week where he said, you probably know of me. I was a very famous general. And he decided he would go in to talk about the Jews and the Nazis. And he says, the Jews were responsible for their own deaths at Auschwitz because when he visited Auschwitz, he was told there were very few guards relative to the number of Jewish was both slaves and people en route to being murdered in the concentration camps. And so just by sheer numbers, the Jews could have overwhelmed them. Well, fact of the matter is that's not true. The Germans had all of the guns. It was surrounded by barbed wire, and the Jews were emaciated. And had they attempted a revolt, They may have been able to kill one or two Germans, but they would never, ever have gotten out of Poland or occupied Europe. And then he went on to say, he says, and talk about how bad the Jews were. Mothers couldn't wait to give their Jews over to the Nazis to be packed into those trains like sardines. The mothers just handed their children over to the Nazis to have them carted away in those trains.
Who said this?
Michael Flynn.
Michael Flynn.
He was a national security advisor to Trump. 4-star U.S. general. No, I guess 3-star. He was a lieutenant general.
That's disgusting.
Yep. Isn't that just...
I'm done more of the Americans.
Flynn blames the Jews for being exterminated in World War II because there were thousands of them and not many guards, and the Jews were willingly going along with the Nazis. Okay, here's my child, and take them away on the train. That's stunning.
It is.
This is a kind of person who was involved in the leadership of America. It boggles the mind how corrupt we can be. I think, speaking of corruption, that the greatest corruption in human history is what Judaism, Islam, and Christianity have done relative to Dowd.
Agreed.
Not one of the three religions even knows the man's name. That it's written with 3 letters, and in Hebrew it reads the same left to right as it does right to left. Deleth, wa deleth. It is 2 doorways, and in the middle the tent peg that is additive. It is securing. It is enlarging on a doorway, and this is the man that opened the door to life as the Passover lamb. He is the man who provides the doorway into the covenant family as well. In Christianity, says there are no prophecies of any kind pertaining to Jesus. Not one. There's no prophecy that said there'd be a coming Messiah. There's no prophecy that names anyone named Jesus, or even a Hebrew variation of Jesus. Not a single prophecy. And so to create the impression that God had predicted this caricature that the Christian faith was perpetrating on the world, Jesus, they needed prophecies that he had to fulfill, and every one of those is actually spoken of Dowd. Even the most famous, Isaiah 9. Dowd's name is in the middle of it. It all speaks of Dowd. 2 Samuel 7 speaks of Dowd. Isaiah 53 speaks of Dowd. Every one of the Mizmowr speaks in first person about the fulfillment of Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym, written by Dowd. In fact, I would say that of the things made evident within the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, there's a lot of things that are made evident. The single most proclaimed event throughout the Torah, prophets, and Psalms is Dowd's fulfillment of Pesach, Matsah, Bikuwrym, and Sha'uwl. And second onto that is the announcement that Dowd is the Messiah and the Son of God, that he is our Yisra'el, the sacrificial lamb, and our Savior, that he is God's firstborn. These are the 2 prophetic statements that have by far the most credibility. They are the most well documented from really the Torah all the way through the prophets. And Dowd's name is therefore mentioned, I think, 1,150 times, give or take a half dozen.
Well,
Dowd's name is mentioned far more often than even Moshe's name. I mean, the only name that is mentioned more than Dowd's is his father, Yahowah.
Mm-hmm.
And so to rob this man of his accolades, Son of God, firstborn, chosen one, most set apart, anointed Messiah, a shepherd, king, even king of kings, Elyown, almighty, as in God himself, Savior, branch. All of these titles and accolades, all were stolen from Dowd and given to Jesus to create credibility for Jesus when there is none. It's one of the great thefts of human history.
Yes.
And
totally.
there is nothing that makes God matter. I mean, God's very angry that his name has been etched out of his testimony, and that the religions claim to serve him when they lead people away from him. He is exceedingly disappointed and frustrated by that, but nothing angers God more than denouncing what his son has done. Most amazing, of course, is in Christianity. The Christians will have their man god die on Pesach, but have no correlation with Pesach at all. They'll not even mention what happened on the Shabat of Matsah, so they got no clue what it represents. And then they'll have a physical bodily resurrection on Bikuwrym, having no concept of what Bikuwrym represents, or that his body was destroyed back there on Passover. And here then the Jews, seeing this mythology of Christianity begin to take root, and rather than just point out the obvious, read the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, everything you're claiming of your guy is actually stated of David. That he is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God, that he is the Passover Lamb, that he is the chosen one. Everything is said of Dowd. And nothing is said of this Jesus fellow that you've imagined. And oh, by the way, he came on the exact day he said he would to fulfill Pesach, Matsah, Bikuwrym, and Shabuw'ah. And then there is no Christianity. You've eliminated the religion that would do more to harm Jews through the ages than any other. And to make matters worse, not only didn't rabbis who emerged at the same time denounce the claims of Christianity by pointing out that all of these things belonged to Dowd, that Dowd was the Messiah, they foisted a false Messiah on the world 2 Yobel later, in the Yobel year of 133 verses 33. And that false Messiah was Bar Kokhba, which is son of a star. And, of course, Israel prays under that symbol even today. So this is what has happened. It's between his people, Dowd's people, who he was making his sacrifice on behalf of, not only don't acknowledge him, they have no respect for what he did. Won't even convey his name correctly. There's no V in Hebrew. It's Dowd, not David. And they allowed Christians to create a religion that would lead to the Holocaust by simply being ignorant and unable and unwilling to acknowledge that everything they claimed of Jesus was actually true of Dowd.
Yep.
And so both religions created these myths on replacement theology, and both claim to have God's authorization when I can tell you God despises both with every fiber of his body, of his spirit, and of his nature. So that's where we pick up the read. And for just as an overview, about 7 or 8 years ago, I came to recognize that everything that was said about Dowd needed to be reapplied to him. That when we speak of Messiah, that's Dowd, David. When we speak of Son of God, that's Dowd, David, because God said so. I rewrote all of the books at that time, 20-some of them, to make certain that we had correctly presented Dowd as the single most important person in God's story. He is the embodiment of the covenant. He is God's firstborn son. He is the returning king. It is Dowd who is coming back as the Messiah and king.
Mm-hmm.
And soon, by the way, year 6000 Yon Kipurym, which is sunset, 6:22 p.m., October 2nd, 2033.
Yep.
So we rewrote all of the books to make certain that we were stating that correctly. But 6 months ago, I was writing, finally returned. We finished all of the edits. They're all, newly designed. We had an entire team that was devoted to this, from social media to a new website to new publications, so that all the books were presented as part of the Yada Yahowah family, all looking the same, all beautifully presented, available at Amazon, available in their entirety at the YadaYah.com site. Built this entire presentation on behalf of God's chosen people, the Israelites, Jews, Yehudim. And I decided it was time, after having written the series on Babel, which was 3 new volumes, based upon the 3 books that were written in Babylon. The 2 books that were written in Babylon became 3 volumes, Daniel and Ezekiel, both of which are for the most part, rotten. And decided I would return to Coming Home. I'd written 2 volumes of Coming Home. I had made it through about the 23rd Mizmowr Psalm. And in those 2 volumes, and decided, okay, I'll return and we'll take off from there. And so I was translating Psalms in their way 24, 25, 26, up through about 31. And in the midst of that, I was dealing with something, Kirk, I know you're going to make part of your glossary, which is stems and moods.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I came across is how often in those Mizmowr, Dowd writes statements where the speaker is you, and you happens to be Yahweh, and they're written in the imperative, which is a second-person expression of free will. So he's saying, projecting on Yahweh, so that Yahweh is the speaker or the subject, and it says, you, and then written in the imperative would mean, you want me to do this. It's your will that I do this. You have decided that it's appropriate that I do this. But those statements were also written in the cohortative. And it's unusual to have 2 volitional moods on the same verb. But the cohortative is a first-person expression of volition. So if Dowd is writing something in first person, which he typically does, and he speaks of Yahweh in second person as you, which he typically does, and he writes it such that it is in the imperative mood, so it'd be expressing Yahweh's will, Yahweh's decision, Yahweh's choice, and in the cohortative, which expresses Dowd's will, Dowd's choice, Dowd's decision, what he has chosen and wants to do. And when he speaks of providing salvation and of intervening on behalf of his people and saving them, every one of the verbs is written expressing the will of the speaker, Dowd, and the will of Yahweh. And so it says that God and Dowd, Yahweh and Dowd, father and son, were of like mind, that this is something they collectively decided to do together. It's what Dowd wanted and Yahweh agreed. Now we're talking about the fulfillment of Pesach and Matsah leading to Bikuwrym and Shabuw'ah. For those of you who don't know what happened, Dowd in the 22nd Mizmowr describes being flayed alive by the Romans and then being nailed to an upright pole to be crucified by the Romans 600, 700 years before Rome even existed, and 800 years before Rome invented crucifixion.
Right.
And so being the Passover lamb is no stroll in the park. It's the most hellacious day any human has ever experienced. And he also volunteered to fulfill Matzah, which is even worse.
Yeah.
And was made particularly worse because Dowd agreed to carry all of our slime, all of our guilt, everything every covenant member has ever done, said, or thought that was wrong, and took it all with him into Sha'uwl, hell, and deposited it there so it could be never seen again. With all of the evidence against us thrown into the black hole of hell, we're exonerated. There's no evidence against us. Not guilty. And so he agreed to endure hell to save us from ourselves after fulfilling Pesach. And all of these Mizmowr were saying the same thing. This is what I want to do. And they're all written with God said, yep, the right decision. I agree with you. You're my son. And those are the two most hellacious days that anyone will ever endure. And I agree with you. It's the right call. The right decision. And you say, wait a minute, why? Well, this is what we ran against 6 months ago. I had always suspected that it was Dowd who fulfilled Pesach and Matsah, leading to Bikuwrym and Shabuw'ah. Because as the firstborn son of God, what do you think Bikuwrym means? Bikuwrym means firstborn children. He's the natural. He's the most obvious beneficiary of Shabuw'ah in terms of being enlightened, to being empowered, being enriched. And so he's the only one that fits those two. And it was just the most logical for the other two. But I couldn't get past the idea of why would Yahweh allow his son to do that? And this now wasn't talking about Yahweh allowing it. It was saying Yahweh saying it's the right thing to do. I'm in total agreement with you. And why would Dowd volunteer? I mean, yeah, he had some rough days when he didn't quite know how to deal with Sha'uwl. He messed up a number of times with his children, particularly Absalom. He made some bad decisions when God gave him some choices. He really screwed up when he had his general killed so that he could take Bathsheba, his wife. But the 2 Samuel 7 says that God gave him a respite from all of this. He was living the good life. Right. And so why would he then not only agree to this, but actually be taken forward in time as the eyewitness to his own crucifixion? That's what the 22nd Mizmowr is. He's volunteering to do this, and yet he has been taken forward in time to witness himself being flailed alive and then tortured in the most extreme manner by the worst of humankind, the Romans. And then he is shown what's going to happen to him on Matzah and Sha'uwl. And he not only says, I'm going to do it, I want to do it. And you're reading this and you're saying, how can that be? And this one day, 6 months ago, I'm reading this and I said, well, I've got to deal with it now because Yahowah and Dowd, father and son, are like mine. This is what they have decided they want. Why? And the answer became obvious, and the more that I've translated since that time, I've seen the answer come up so many, many, many times. I'm finishing my translation of Mizmowr 88, and it's a complete and total rewrite. Mizmowr 88 is written on the fulfillment of Matzah, and they trip into hell, being laden with our guilt. And as you do this, Dowd gave the answer in the introduction to the 88th Mizmowr. I don't know if you know that. I didn't know it until I started this, and something that I thought I'd be finished with the 8th volume of Yada Yahowah in the rewrite a week ago, and I'm still halfway through because it's a treasure. I had no idea that Dowd actually gave us the answer that I came up with some time ago. And so as I'm reading this, Dowd devotes the 88th Mizmowr to Qorach. He was as bad as they ever got. Qorach led a rebellion against Moshe and against Yahowah. Yahowah opened up the earth to swallow him, and says specifically he and his 250 co-conspirators he sent alive into Sha'uwl. And it goes on to talk about the people that set the example that caused him to recognize that he had to do this. Because here's Moshe flabbergasted that all of this is happening to him, and Moshe is trying to deal with it, and this is one revolt among a dozen that are just revolting, and in one of them that is hinted at pretty vociferously in the 88th Mizmowr, it's when the Hebrews even went to Moshe and said, we've been through this before. We told you we didn't want you to be our Savior. Now, you tried this once before, and we told you we didn't want what you were offering. So right now we want to return to the land of milk and honey, and that's Egypt. We want to be slaves again. And so Dowd is the foremost expert on the Torah. Since Moshe, there's been no one who knows the Torah better than does Dowd. Dowd wrote all about this throughout the 119th Mizmowr. 8 verses for every letter in the Hebrew alphabet in alphabetical order on how to observe the Torah. He knew, which is how he wrote the introduction to this psalm, that Moshe was a man of exemplary character, and that Moshe did almost nothing wrong and almost everything right. That Dowd was more of a livable rogue, and yet Yisraelites, with God's presence among them, with God feeding them and saving them and intervening for them and being there as a column of fire in the night and as a cloud pillar in the day and there in the tabernacle, there with them all the time, they were constantly revolting against Moshe. And Dowd, with all of his screw-ups, had to say, you want me to lead these people forever? Are you kidding me? Moshe couldn't do it for 40 years. And I'm no Moshe. And by the way, you were there the whole time. No. And oh, by the way, it's an entirely different scenario. They were slaves, about to be wiped out and extinct as a people. You remove them from the absolute worst possible circumstances and led them to freedom, and they couldn't even endure Moshe under those circumstances. Yep. And you want me to lead this group of people forever? It's not possible. No. And then Dowd figured it out. He said, wait a minute. Yep. Pesach and Matsah leads to Bikuwrym and to Shabuw'ah and to Taruw'ah and Kipurym. You want me to come back on Kipurym to be the king of Sukkah? Aha. Why do we start with Kipurym when we should start with Pesach? Let me open the door. Let me unburden my people of all the things they did to Moshe. And they've done to me. Let me take all of that away. I will pay the price to be their Savior. And under that basis, 100% of those who make it into forever and celebrate my return on Kipurym as I seek to lead them forevermore through Sukkah will respect me. They will respect what I have done. I will have earned their respect because, frankly, none of them would be there if I hadn't done this. It's 2 days. Okay, it's 2 really bad days. But it's for all time. And it pulls the entire picture together of Father and Son completing the most important acts in human history. Together. Pesach Bikuwrym. Pesach Matsah Bikuwrym Shabuw'ah. Taruw'ah, which is about announcing this regarding Dowd. Kipurym, the Day of Reconciliations, where he anoints the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, so that Yisra'el and Yahweh can reconcile their relationship and then camp out together through Sukkah. And so once we recognize that is not only God's intent and will, and Dowd's intent and will, but once you recognize the motivation for both, and then you recognize that it's repeated hundreds and hundreds of times. It's the single most explained series of events in the Torah and prophets. And it actually begins in the first Mizmowr and is evident in the second Mizmowr. And it's particularly evident here in the 89th Mizmowr. And it is exceedingly evident throughout everything that Yeshayahu, Isaiah wrote. It's the common denominator of everything in the Torah and prophets. And there are so many hints in the Torah about specifically what Dowd would do. So that is why we're studying this. And once we came to that realization, it meant that, okay, there's now 30 books on the shelf. They all have to be rewritten. Because, well, I knew that Dowd was the Messiah and the Son of God, I had to eliminate this aberration that I had created called Yosha. I named him after Yosha ben Nun because it was the only name that I could think of that would justify the creation of an Ayusun, Jesus fellow, and it bear the name that would describe the purpose, which is Yahweh saves. Well, actually, Yahweh uses that name, and so, but it's not used in conjunction with fulfilling Pesach and Matsah.
Right.
And then, so what I assumed was that it was Yahweh using his soul to fulfill these events, which, so Yahweh could experience what it's like to fulfill Pesach, but boy, that's having Rome beat up God is a pretty awful thought, and how does Yahweh even his soul go to a place of separation from Yahweh? And the idea of Yahweh then fulfilling firstborn children, his soul certainly is not his son. And then how does Yahweh fulfill Bikuwrym, Shabuw'ah? Because how are you going to enrich and empower God? It didn't make any sense. But I was trying to figure it out, and so now what I needed to do is go back and eliminate every reference to Yosha. And had to eliminate every reference to this idea that it would have been Yahweh's soul trying to, working as a probe to try to accomplish these things on our behalf. And it might sound simple, but you find that there's something that is suggestive of this of almost every page of, volumes that average 600 pages. And so we've been diligently doing this, and right now we're in the 8th volume of Yada Yahowah after completing the previous 7 volumes of Yada Yahowah, 3 volumes of An Introduction to God, 3 volumes of Babel, and 3 volumes of Coming Home. So,
can I ask a question about the soul of Dowd? I was thinking about what you had translated, where Yahweh describes Dowd's soul being basically asleep, the only exception that we know of, and that he didn't want to prolong his life unnaturally to eat the bread of affliction until he could fulfill this role. And I was thinking that it makes sense that you wouldn't want a soul to pass over into eternity and then bring them back to earth once they're immortal to fulfill a role that a mortal should be fulfilling. Right. And it just made sense to me. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I was wondering your thoughts.
We broke up a little bit on your explanation there.
Sorry.
But one of the things, and maybe this might help too, is that in 2 Samuel 7, one of the concluding statements is that Yahweh, when he's saying he's bringing Dowd back, he says he's going to essentially reconstruct Dowd from a tiny portion of his physical existence, which would be DNA. Mm-hmm. And so I've come to the conclusion that the Dowd who was crucified, that fulfilled Passover, that body, was essentially identical to Dowd, probably as Dowd was when he was 33 years old. And the reason is that body would make his son feel the most comfortable. That was his body. And he was offering that body as the Pesach El. So it was the flaming red hair and very, very handsome human being. And you get around the problem of that because the only place where it says that he wouldn't be appealing is in the preamble to Yeshaya 53. But the preamble of Yeshaya 53 that says, this is nothing to that you would admire him based upon his human characteristics. That's written about the person who figures out who the Zerah are, and it's the lead into that is the voice calling out. That is the Bashar, the witness. That's not Dowd.
Right.
That's the fellow speaking to you. And so he's the one that isn't that you would not say, wow, that is a really distinguished and somebody that I'm going to swoon around. The actual Dowd was that kind of guy, but his messenger, his herald, is not. So I think it was Dowd's DNA, and I think that Dowd was unique also in this way. He had 2 clunkers as mothers. And it was part of the beauty of it is because he also had a clunker as a father. Both times. I think he had he struck out on fathers and mothers on first and second existences, first and second lives. Yishay was a scallywag. Yishay, in his all the stuff that we hear from him, he doesn't say anything that is positive, and a number of things that are negative.
No.
And his mother is not even mentioned either time, either life. Mm-hmm. So I think that's written that way to tell us that God understands that human families are fractured. And that's why he's offering us a covenant family. And so Dowd's real mother is the set-apart spirit, both times. And his real father is Yahowah, both times. And so he had the best father and mother in the world, in the universe, even though he had real clunkers as birth parents. So I think that's part of all of this. But it was Dowd that fulfilled Pesach. It's Dowd that's the Messiah. It's Dowd that's coming back. It is Dowd that fulfilled Matsah. And he fulfilled Matsah by allowing his soul to be laden with our guilt and taking it into Sha'uwl to deposit it there so that there is no evidence against us, and therefore we appear perfect.
Yep.
All right, with that, let's resume where we were. We left off on a summary of the 89th, and I just want to read the 33 through 35th and then share some thoughts with you about it. This is God speaking. His name is Yahowah. He says, I will never betray who I am by communicating something which is misleading or untrue, nor will I ever contradict or undermine my steadfast commitment to uphold the truth and remain accurate and reliable. I will never dishonor or betray, nor will I create loopholes which alter my covenant, Berethani. Nor will I ever alter, disguise, or change, rearrange, or modify, duplicate that which has gone forth from my lips. So God's saying, if I've said it, I'm not going to contradict it, which means that replacement theology is impossible. It means that there can be no Talmud, there can be no New Testament, there can be no Quran. God's never going to betray who he is by saying something which contradicts or undermines something he has previously conveyed. And he is never going to dishonor his covenant. There is one of them. There is no new covenant. There's only one covenant, and that covenant family is central to God's purpose and will. Echad, there is only one to whom I have affirmed the truth by having made a promise, thereby validating my commitment, which will be affirmed 7 times. How many Moed Miqra'ey are there? 7.
Of course.
By Kodesh Ani, by my unique set-apart nature, if not to, through, and regarding Dowd, the beloved, I am delusional and will be proven a liar. I do not think that the creator of life, the author of this universe that we live in, is delusional. The spirit behind the Torah and prophets is not a liar. Everything that he has said has come true. And therefore what he has said about Dowd is true. But what he is saying here is that if you are to foist a Bar Kokhba or a Jesus Christ on the people and establish a religion based upon a false Messiah and claim that I am the inspiration and the God of your religion, you are calling me a liar. I don't think God much likes being called a liar.
No.
This is the right line drawn by God in the sands of time. The phone ringing behind me happens to be my youngest son, who should know that I'm doing this program at this time, but he has called 3 times, so there's something going on there. If he calls again, I might have to take a moment and deal with it. But this was presented in year 3000. Hang on one second. I want to give the phone to my wife. Let her call him back and see if there's an emergency that can be dealt with. Okay,
sure.
Just 1 second.
Okay, no problem. I saw someone didn't understand my question, so I'm just going to explain for a moment, if that's okay with you, Kirk, that
sure,
what I was getting at was if Dowd went to become a four-dimensional being and then came back three-dimensional to be born as a mortal, it doesn't make as much sense to me because I was trying to understand why Yahweh would put Dowd to sleep and then have him return.
Thank you. Yeah,
as the lamb. That was my question.
He wouldn't call me 3 times if there wasn't something going on, so I've given the phone to
He
Layla
okay?
see if she can. We're going to find out. I do not know.
Okay.
If she brings the phone back to me and say that I need to deal with this, then I'll have to take a time out. He's an adult now and lives on his own, has a wonderful job and girlfriend and the like. But
so your kid.
he's still my kid. And and father-son relationships, as Dowd can attest, are important ones. And so I'm actually a very fortunate man that relationship is not fractured. It's a very healthy and good one. So anyway, this Mizmowr that we're reading, the 89th, was written exactly 3,000 years ago. It was written in 968 BCE. That means that it was written. That means that it's written 3 years after, 3,000 years after we were escorted out of the garden of great joy. Adam and Sha'uwl were expelled, and is written exactly 3,000 years before Yahweh and Dowd will return on Yom Kipurym. This is the fulcrum upon which humanity pivots in one way or another, like the teeter-totter on the fulcrum going up or down. So Yahweh undeniably and unequivocally presented his most impassioned plea to his people at the center point in time. His focus was on his family and his foremost son. This is the cornerstone of the bereth and of the family home known as the temple. And it was laid upon Moriah, and it is the one that everyone has rejected. Over the past 22 years, as both you, Kirk and Dee, know, I have come upon some, probably 2,000 or 3,000 unique insights, several hundred of them exceedingly important, profound, that have gone unheralded for some of them for 3,000 years, most for 2,500 years or more. And during that time, I would have to say that the single most important discovery is the realization that Yahweh and Dowd, father and son, fulfilled the 7 Moed Miqra'ey together, and what that means to us and what they had to say about these things, and how Dowd is the center of the covenant, God's firstborn son. And it is the thing that once you come to realize this, it just profoundly enhances your life. It enhances your understanding of Yahweh, your adoration for Yahweh, and his love for his son and his very nature, that he would fulfill. This means for us to reconcile our relationship with him and be part of his family together with his son. This is the cornerstone of understanding. This is the greatest discovery, really, in human history.
Agreed.
And what's so amazing about it, though, is that, well, we are the first to share this and explain it and prove it. 3,000 years. It should have been obvious. You know, it's really hard to take credit for something that is this obvious. I mean, what in the world did people think that the 22nd Mizmowr clearly speaks of crucifixion in the fulfillment of Passover? And the 88th clearly speaks of the fulfillment of Matsah, leading to Bikuwrym. And so does Isaiah 53. What in the world, what were people thinking when they were reading these things? And it's so blatantly obvious that it is Dowd is the one doing this. So why would we be the first in 3,000 years to discover something, well, infinitely more valuable than discovering the Ark of the Covenant?
Sure. Truly.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, this is actually a more important find than the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's not to
so
say
it couldn't be corrupted?
The Ark of the Covenant is an exceedingly important treasure, and it will be brought to light so that Dowd can anoint the mercy seat upon his return. And I'm not suggesting in any way that it isn't an exceptional treasure. And of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls have led to so much of our understanding. But there is nothing more valuable than recognizing this. It brings everything together. One cohesive picture that God has painted from beginning to end. No loose ends. And yet it's obvious, so why? How could his people miss this? Well, I guess if you read the story about Qorach or the Waters of Marybah, you'll know the answer to that. It is the cornerstone that everyone has rejected. Had Yehudim listened, had they embraced and accepted Yahweh's approach to Dowd and the covenant, Yisra'el would have remained the brightest light in an enlightened world. The assaults of the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Macedonians, the Romans, that never would have occurred. Dowd's return to fulfill the first four Moedim would have been celebrated with God's people flocking into the covenant. Paul would have been so immediately and completely rebuked and discredited that Christianity would never have existed. Akiba and his false Messiah would never have been heralded, nipping the emergence of Judaism in the bud. There would have been no diaspora, no oppression in Europe over the millennia. Without rabbis and their Talmud, Muhammad would have had insufficient material to flesh out his Quran, and Islam would have died in Petra. There would be no Dome of the Rock, no Al-Aqsa Mosque, no Islamic terrorism. The Holocaust would never have occurred. Of all of the things to ignore, these declarations from Yahweh were the costliest and most debilitating for Jews. The relationship God intended was replaced by religion, and humankind suffered, estranged from Yahweh as a consequence. This is really in your face. God can't put something any more bluntly or in our face, throw it at our faces, than saying, if you discount what I have said about Dowd being the Messiah, Dowd being the Son of God, Dowd being your Savior, if you discount that by attributing it to a false Messiah and a false Savior, you're calling me a liar.
Some strong words.
How strong.
Boy.
And this is the creator of the universe that is saying this. If you do this, you're calling me a liar. Yeah. And yet the most popular religion in the history of humanity does this very thing. And the religion that dominates his people did this very thing. How could we be so stupid?
Yeah.
You know, I know that Dee, that my wife is creating animations that are becoming quite popular in Yisra'el, directing people to Yahweh's name, you know, Shema.
Yes, several Jews have shared.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yahweh is God's Shem. Yahweh's one. And beautiful animations that introduce Yisra'el to Yahweh again, and they're being viewed and passed along in Yisra'el. And we do our best to promote this program in Yisra'el, because we do this for Yisra'el. The purpose of the 89th Psalm is to prepare God's people for the return of your Messiah and the Son of God, your King, Dowd. That is the entire purpose of Taruw'ah for which we were called. And so as I share these words, I'm critical, of course, of the rabbis for blundering this, but how is it possible that God's people have missed this? You have the Tanakh. You can read it. You can open it to the 22nd Mizmowr, to the 89th Mizmowr. You can read 2nd Samuel 7. You can read Yeshaya 9. You can read Yeshaya 52 and 53. In fact, you can read Yeshaya 11 and understand who it is that's talking to you and why. It's all there for you. It's always been there for you. Capitalize on it. You're willing to call your country Israel based upon Yisra'el. But you won't call yourselves Yehudim, Yahweh's beloved. You won't even mention Yahweh's name. Well, that's what we're trying to solve and resolve, because Yahweh and Dowd are returning on Yom Kipurym in year 6000 Yah, October 2nd, just 10 years away. And to be among the celebrants on that day, you will need to embrace Yahweh's name. You will need to accept what he and his son have achieved. You'll need to understand that there are conditions for participation in the covenant, and they are all to your advantage, and that there are benefits associated with that covenant that were provided by Father and Son as they fulfilled the Miqra'ey. Christians, believing that Sha'uwl, Paul, spoke the truth instead of the Father and Son who are articulated in this story, have created the most common and thus the most profane religion in the history of humanity by transferring the promises made to Dowd and to Yisra'el such they were given to the mythological misnomer Jesus Christ. Shame on them for believing and promoting such contradictions of Yahweh's testimony, for undermining the measure of God's mercy and the reliability of his testimony. There will be no accommodation for a gospel of grace, for salvation by faith, for a New Testament, for Jesus Christ being the Messiah, the Son of God, King of Kings or Savior. There was no Jesus Christ. To claim otherwise is to call God a liar. And as sad as that is, it's even sadder that Jews allowed this religion to grow up in their midst and then torment them simply because they were unwilling to acknowledge the obvious. Well, let's stop playing that game. Now, while these words from our God serve as a death blow to Christianity, and a death blow hammered out 1,000 years before Paul thrust his demonic devotion upon an unsuspecting world, his New Testament was not the gravest crime. How did 150 generations of Jewish sages, scholars, and rabbis over the course of 3,000 years all managed to get this wrong? Why did they collectively and individually deprive Jews of knowing Yahweh through his son, Dowd? Why did they prevent the salvation of several 100 million Jewish souls? Why isn't there a single credible Jewish sage, scholar, or rabbi on record affirming and promoting the impassioned message of Father and Son as it is articulated here in the 89th Mizmowr? Everything. Literally everything, including the survival of Yisra'el and humankind. The salvation of our souls is predicated upon the words Yahweh spoke to us 3,000 years ago in the 89th Mizmowr Psalm about his son. And this bold declaration does not stand alone. Instead, reinforced by the entirety of the Torah and prophets. It is the same wonderfully consistent and enormously loving message throughout. The 89th Mizmowr is just the grand crescendo of the chorus. The reason this is so is because Father and Son fulfilled the Miqra'ey together. And for those that would say, oh, come on, first of all, Jews don't even believe the Miqra'ey were fulfilled. They think that Passover is a 7-day event and that Matzah no longer exists, nor does Bikuwrym. They've written the single most important Miqra'ey, where we are exonerated and perfected so that we can be adopted into God's family. They've written those things out of their religion. And they are unwilling to acknowledge that Pesach was fulfilled in year 4000 Yah, as was Matzah, Bikuwrym, and Shabuw'ah, or that Dowd, as the Son of God and the Messiah, did these things. And in so doing have deprived everyone of the opportunity that they provide. And it is by Pesach that we live. Pesach wasn't just the doorway to the Exodus. The Exodus didn't even begin until the following day. Pesach is the doorway to life. And Dowd opened it for us. And Matzah is that threshold which perfects us, because Dowd taking all of our guilt and depositing it off into Sha'uwl so that we could be perfected and adopted into Yahweh's family. This is the very conditions of the covenant that Yahweh conveyed to Abraham. Walk to me and become perfect. Be perfected. This is precisely what he talked about. This is the cornerstone of the family home. We find and embrace the Father through the Son. They're inseparable. And they are becoming indistinguishable, which is what Elyown means. God would go on to call his son, Dowd, Elyown, Almighty God. El is God. On means in Hebrew, when it's presented as a suffix, means all things pertaining to. And the only thing between on and El in this is the hand of God. Dowd is the hand of God, and all things pertaining to God can be seen and experienced through Dowd. Elyown indeed. There is one God with a single Torah, and he has one covenant, albeit 7 Miqra'ey, to bring us home. There is one Messiah, one Son of God, and a single Passover lamb. He is our Savior. This will never change. It'll never be altered in any way. Nothing Yahweh revealed has been annulled, especially his love for his firstborn son. His offspring and that which he sows, Zerah. Zerah, by the way, is the verb that serves to define Zeroah, which is the single most important title afforded to the Messiah. His offspring and that which he sows, Zerah, will exist and endure forever. He opened the doorway to life, which is why that is so. And his place of honor, his dignity and authority, as well as his adornment, will be as brilliant as the sun before me. Similar to the moon, he is established forevermore, while serving as an enduring and reliable, truthful, and dependable witness in the universe. Pause now and contemplate what you have just read. Mizmowr lyrics to sing, Psalm 89:37. That's a lot to process. Mm-hmm. When Dowd says, I think you need to stop here and think about it. Okay, well, first of all, he has defined his single most important title. His most important title is not king. It's not Messiah. It's not Son of God. It's not chosen one. Dowd's single most important title is defined by this verb, Zerah. It speaks of sowing seeds which take root and grow and are particularly productive. And that those seeds that generate new life are describing eternal offspring, being part of the covenant. So he has defined his single most important title, Zerah. And of course, Zeroah was the one title that was used multiple times in the preamble to this Mizmowr. When Messiah was used once and Zeroah, I think, was used 4 times. So his offspring, that which he sows, Zerah, will exist and endure forever. He's talking about the eternal family of God, the covenant family, and that he has opened the door that makes it possible for us to live forever. Therefore, his place of honor, his dignity, his authority, as well as his adornment, will be as brilliant as the sun before me. We talked about the eclipses in our last program and how In 33 CE, there was a solar eclipse in year 4000 Yah on the first day of the year, first day of Abib, and that there was a lunar eclipse in the afternoon of I think it's Abib, well, it'd be Abib 14, but of I think it's April 3rd of 33 CE. There was a lunar eclipse on the day that Pesach was fulfilled. And as we go forward in time to the fulfillment of Kipurym in year 6000 Yah, we find that in 2033, which is year 6000 Yah, on the first of Tishri, which is Taruw'ah, there will be a full solar eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
And that on Sukkah, which is the fulfillment of Yah's intent when he returns to camp out with his children, there will be a full lunar eclipse. And God specifically says that the light of the sun and of the moon will be dimmed at that time. And the reason that we're going to see the solar and lunar eclipse coincide with the Moed Miqra'ey, with these last three, Moed Miqra'ey, is that Yahweh and Dowd are going to be our light. Dowd's going to be as brilliant as the sun. And even as the moon is mentioned here, the moon is the means for us to designate when these last three Moed will be fulfilled. The sun reflects his father's light, just as the moon reflects the light of the sun.
That's beautiful.
So it's a beautiful testament, yes, to what God is establishing. So he's saying his son, Dowd, is going to be as brilliant as the sun, and he is going to be as enduring as the light of the moon, always reliable and dependable. And as a result of him sowing these seeds, we will live forever. And that this result transpires within Shamayim, within the universe, which beckons us. It's a lot to say about a man. Wouldn't you love to have those credentials?
I think I'm good not.
Yeah, I'm not so sure I want to pay the price. I'm a little too wimpy to do the crucifixion and the trip into to hell, and I don't have the motivation either. First of all, I was already taken care of. Thank you very much. I'm going to capitalize on a good thing, but we're not called to lead God's people forevermore. So we really don't need that. Not looking for respect. I'm looking for a good time. One of my kids that I've adopted here on the island says, we're not here for a long time. We're here for a good time.
I like it.
Yeah, I think I'm here for a long time and for a good time. But and I'm glad to help Dowd out as whatever he may need. And I'm not opposed to work, but he had a unique situation, and that's why he did what he did, and we most certainly don't need to do it. But clearly the son's dignity, his authority, as well as the symbols of his majesty will be brilliant. He has to be dressed brilliantly, by the way, adorned brilliantly, because he is acting as the chief priest, the head priest, and because what he's doing is he is going into the newly established, probably constructed out of light, but home for the covenant. And in the most set-apart place, the Ark of the Covenant will be again, and it'll be Dowd's responsibility to do what Yahweh instructed, which is to anoint the mercy seat to enable the reconciliation of the remnant of Yisra'el who has gathered this day. It'll be a grand celebration of the Torah. Can you imagine being there, seeing the house of Yahweh reestablished, seeing Dowd and as brilliant as the sun, going in and anointing, and you're actually looking at the Ark of the Covenant with the cherubim on the opposite sides, and it's a seat, and you realize it's not only Dowd's seat of honor, it's ours as well. And that's not just Yahweh's home, it's our home as well. And that guy that's doing all of this stuff, he just happens to be our king and our shepherd. And this is our home.
That's awesome.
And this is our God. And we're his kids.
Yep.
Hey,
And that's what we're being offered.
don't turn it down.
I'll be seeing you guys there.
Yeah, so it's the greatest sight in the history of humanity. For us, the greatest day was Dowd's worst. It was the fulfillment of Matsah. I think it might have been Yahweh's worst as well, seeing his son volunteer to carry our guilt into Sha'uwl after having his body bludgeoned by the Romans. That had to be the very lowest point of Yahweh's existence. Certainly the lowest point of Dowd's existence, but it is the single most important day for us. Both Pesach and Matsah, but particularly Matsah. That is the day of days for us. That's why God goes to the fullest extent he's possible. Every accolade that he can throw on a day, he throws on Matsah. It's the most set apart. It is the most essential. It is a chag. It is a Shabbaton, which means it's to celebrate all things associated with the Sabbath on top of all of it. It's the day of days. You're going to celebrate it for 7 days. You just can't say enough about it. It's not the day of days for Yahweh. Day of day for Yahweh. And I think also for Dowd is Kipurym. This is the homecoming. This is the family reunion. Everything that father and son have done, everything Moshe did, everything that he did with Abraham, everything he did with Jacob, all of it is for Kipurym to be a success so that Sukkah is enjoyed.
What a time to be alive.
It is. And all of the promises that God made to the Nakri and the Choter and the Bashar to serve as the cold voice to call God's people home, it is all for that purpose, so that it's a marvelous celebration of a family reunion on Kipurym, and that Yisraelites and Yehudim are looking up to Yahweh and coming with the one that they have pierced, and with tears of joy in their eyes, seeing father and son return, and knowing that we will be an eternal family, living forever together. This is the time to be alive. And that's just 10 years from this moment. Embrace it. But this is the day of days for Yahweh, when there's nothing on Yahweh's calendar that appeals to him more than this family reunion. And at this point, it is just all joy. It's why so many of the events of this day are delegated. Yahweh is going to spend this day, every moment of it, relishing the hugs and smiles and handshakes and giggles and just genuine joy and happiness associated with every individual soul who is part of the covenant family and is going to be there forever. It is the day of days. And it is why we exist. We are the living embodiment of Taruw'ah, to call God's people to Kipurym.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking about this. You wrote a letter to me this week, Dee, talking about the events of 2024. That next year is another one of those years where there is a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse on the Moed Miqra'ey, and that's exceedingly rare. Now, there are years there are both solar and lunar eclipses. Lunar eclipses are much more common than solar eclipses. And by the way, just on this idea of the sun and the moon and telling a story, do you know how many times larger the sun is than the moon?
Oh, I don't know how many, but a lot.
400. What is the number of a period of completion of a time of testing? If you wanted to use something as a
40.
sign, well, yeah, 40.
What do you do?
Mm-hmm. The sun is exactly 400 times larger than the moon. How much further away is the sun than the moon?
A lot of miles, light years.
400 times.
No way.
The only reason that solar eclipses work is because while the sun is 400 times larger than the moon, it is 400 times further away. 400 and 400. So when God speaks of the sun and the moon, he's also conveying a message that is relevant in the relative sizes and distances of these things. And that is what's causing the eclipse that draws our attention to these days and the year 6,000 Yah being the fulfillment of Yah's message. But as you said, that 2024 would give us a longer period of time to be away from God's people, because what you'd be talking about, the only event that would happen be called with the eclipses would be possibly the Taruw'ah harvest, which I'm hoping is much later in 2029, because it just gives us more time.
Right.
And I can tell you for certain, we need more time.
Yeah.
Israel is doing what God predicted. It's disintegrating, and it's going to become, life's going to be very difficult for Jews. And it is during that difficult time that a number of Yisraelites and Yehudim are going to come home and to realize that is their best hope. So we are very encouraged by that path, that the time of Yaakov's troubles will cause Jews to reach out to Yahweh, and they will find this message, and it will resonate with them. But between now and then, this should be the talk of Yisra'el. Rather than progressives arguing against judicial reform and Haredim arguing against this idea that they shouldn't be parasites, this really should be the talk of Yisra'el. And wouldn't you love it if you could have a genuine debate? I'd debate anybody. I mean, this is what God said. Do you want to argue with him?
Not I.
You want to call God you want to call God a liar?
No,
You know that works out
so hard.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So this is our Taruw'ah. This is our message to God's people, and we want you to join us. We want you to have an appreciation of all that Father and Son are offering. Dowd is not only Yahweh's most enduring and reliable witness, but he is the most readily verified source of restoring testimony.
Amazing.
It's a role that, he has carried it out so well over the years. And his testimony will endure forevermore as we laugh and play through space and time. Our steps will be guided by Dowd's reflection of Yahweh's almighty light.
Think of Mizmowr 19:1. about the heavens
Yes.
quantifying the unit of measure.
Yeah.
Yahweh's handiwork, written by
Yes.
Dowd.
Yeah, and guess who his most handy work happens to be? Fulfilling the Moed Miqra'ey with Dowd.
Yeah.
Even an insight insight in that declaration.
Yeah.
And so, Christians, you can take your Madonna and child and her baby Jesus and your dead God on a stick and your second coming, and you can put them where the sun don't shine, because they don't belong in Yah's world. You know, as for the Haredi and their horrifyingly morbid mourning clothes, they're perfectly suited to continuing to worship dead rabbis, which is what they do, while giving lip service to the Hashem they do not know and the Torah they have replaced, all while awaiting the arrival of their unknown Messiah.
Mm.
As for the enlightened, the informed, the rational, the reasonable, the second third of Dowd's song, One Day Soon, I hope that you will all join me in the covenant family when we sing this to our King. So this is a recap of the second third of this magnificent Mizmowr. And we'll end this program on this review. It begins with 89:25. As such, I will place my hand into the sea and my right side adjacent to flowing waters. The adversary will not outwit or nullify him, never negating his value or annulling his purpose, and the son of evil will not deny him or denigrate him, because he will have no answer for him. And so I will pulverize, even crush, vanquish, and incarcerate his foes, especially those who seek to constrain and restrict him. Then out of his presence I will plague those who shun him by attempting to decrease his status. Therefore, my steadfast commitment to the truth and my unwavering love, determined devotion, and enduring favoritism, my ongoing affection and genuine love are with him. In my name, his light will radiate and will enlighten, and his brilliant horn, symbolic of his status and strength and his role as the protective ram among the sheep during Pesach and again during Taruw'ah, will be lifted up and raised on high and exalted. He himself will call out to me, and he will welcome me, announcing, "You are my Father." And I also will bestow him as a gift, appointing and making him Bikuwrym, my firstborn. As Elyown, Almighty God, the highest and uppermost in comparison to the kings and rulers of the earth. For all eternity, I will keep watch over him, paying very close attention to him, focusing on him. My unwavering love, unrelenting devotion, enduring affection, and genuine favoritism, in addition to my family-oriented covenant, are truthfully presented and reliably established, verified, and enduring through him. And I will establish his seed and that which he sows, especially his offspring, as an eternal witness forever. And his throne and dignity will be equated to the days of heaven. However, if his children continue to forsake, to ignore, to neglect, or reject my Torah teaching and guidance, and they make a habit of failing to walk according to my means to justly resolve disputes, if they perpetually view my clearly communicated prescriptions for living with contempt, and further, if they consistently fail to observe the instructive terms of the relationship agreement, then I will hold them accountable doing so with the full measure of their religious rebellion and their popular political revolts. The consequence of their deviation from the way and their wrongdoing will be a pestilence which causes widespread death. According to my unwavering love, enduring devotion, unmitigated favoritism, affection, and generosity, I will never revoke, disassociate, or remove from him, or withdraw from him, or stop being with him. I will never betray who I am by communicating something which is misleading or untrue, nor will I ever contradict or undermine my steadfast commitment to uphold the truth and remain accurate and reliable. I will never dishonor or betray, nor will I create loopholes which alter my covenant family. Nor will I amend, disguise, or change, rearrange, modify, or duplicate that which has gone forth from my lips. Echad. There is only one, to whom I have declared the truth by having made a promise, thereby validating my commitment, which will be affirmed 7 times over by my Kodesh Ani, my uniquely set-apart nature. If not to, through, and regarding Dowd, the beloved, I am delusional and will be proven a liar. His offspring and that which he sows will exist and endure forever, and his place of honor, his dignity and authority, as well as his adornment, will be as brilliant as the sun before me, as my conspicuous counterpart. Similar to the moon, he is established, appointed, set in place, and trusted forevermore throughout time, while serving as an enduring and reliable, trustworthy and dependable witness and source of restoring testimony in the universe of space-time for laughter and for play. Pause now and contemplate what you have just heard.
Wow. Wow.
It's so amazing that Yahweh, who proves that he is God through the prophecies in his Torah and prophets, who is the only credible creator of the universe, the very author of life, said this 3,000 years ago about one man. And yet, his own people don't believe him.
It's painful.
What must we do, Yisra'el, to change that? Are you so stubborn that you'd prefer to join in the revolt like Qorach? Are you going to be one of those that tells Moshe, we didn't appreciate you when you tried to save us originally. We don't appreciate you now. Go away. Are you going to rally around a star, promoting a false messiah like Bar Kokhba? The father of your religion is responsible for the diaspora, and therefore for all of the hell God's people endured in Europe, all because he lied. You're going to trust him over the God who spoke these words about his son? You're going to believe Maimonides and saying that one of the pillars of Judaism is that a Messiah is returning and you don't know his name when Yahweh said his name is Dowd? Who are you going to believe? is there any reason to doubt the credibility of the 89th Mizmowr?
No, absolutely not.
So when you take it at face value, it says that Dowd is the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who is going to return as if God, the chosen one.
Quite overtly.
The Zerah, the sacrificial lamb. It's all there. And if there's no reason to discredit it, why run from what it says?
Can I just jump in for one
Sure.
quick second?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think I've been doing this close to 16 years with you. I mean, it's dominated my life for 16 years. Everything has bowed to whatever I could do to participate in this. I'm not a big participator, but whatever I can do, that's what I'm going to do. I have never, this last 24 hours, I've been reading this and reading this and reading this. I have never had so much clarity and such a deep understanding of exactly what it is and how really pissed off God is. How dare and that they toss this stuff out like it means nothing. But today has been probably the best day. I was sitting here during the whole show thinking, I am so glad to live for the day. If I didn't live another day, I am so glad. This has been the best show. This is just what a day I've had. I was up at 6 o'clock this morning, and I'm wired now.
Yeah. My sense was for both of you as I was sharing what we had come to know, and it was a very long preamble that was extemporaneous this evening. That this was like, for both of you, it was like taking a bath in the light. Yeah. It's like just God is shining this loving and brilliant, warm and inviting light upon us, and that we're standing in the midst of it, looking up and feeling all warm and excited and blessed and enlightened and liberated and empowered, and it's just like everything that he's ever promised to us, he has confirmed in these words. Because that is the one thing that and I'm glad you mentioned this, because for a concluding thought, it is breathtaking to recognize that Yahweh supported Dowd's decision to fulfill the 7 Moed Miqra'ey, beginning with Pesach and Matsah, leading to Bikuwrym and Shabuw'ah. It is breathtaking to hear Yahweh, God, speak this lovingly and highly of a man.
Yes.
Dowd.
Yeah.
And all of the things that he is committed to doing with him and through him, and how he loves him. But that's not the most important part of this story. The most important part of this story is that God says, I've made a lot of promises, and I'm not going to renege on any of them. And the single biggest commitment I have made is to my covenant family. And I'm not changing a thing regarding it. Do you know that everything that Yahweh did through Dowd is for us?
Yeah, I get that. Absolutely.
So the moral of the 89th Mizmowr isn't that Yahweh chose and Dowd agreed to fulfill the Moed Miqra'ey together and to embody what it means to be part of the covenant family. The message of the 89th Mizmowr is that everything that Yahweh and Dowd achieved together was done for us.
Yes.
Yeah,
Dowd's
exactly.
Dowd's not going to be the only Elyown there. Dowd will not be the only one as brilliant as the sun. Dowd is not the only one who will proclaim, "You are my father." he isn't the only one who's going to hear God say, "You are my son or daughter."
Wow.
That is the power of this psalm, is that this is God's commitment on behalf of all of us who have chosen to be part of his covenant.
Incredible.
God did not inspire this message regarding Dowd for Dowd. Dowd had his first life was over for 4 years.
Yeah.
First life was over for 4 years. That's when this was written. This was written as the cornerstone of the temple was being established. That's when this was written. This was not spoken on behalf of and for the benefit of Dowd. It was written for our benefit.
Yeah.
So that we would know how to capitalize, so that we would know how to enjoy these same benefits. So for us to recognize that all of this was done for us. Are you listening, Yisra'el? This is God's gift. He didn't just say, he's my son. He said, I gave him to you.
Yeah.
This is your gift. Yeah. So that's the message I'd like to leave tonight with, is that
well said.
The 89th Mizmowr speaks exceedingly highly of Dowd, and that Dowd is overwhelmingly the most important person who has ever lived relative to us being part of God's family. But the reason he did what he did, the reason he said what he said, the reason that this Mizmowr exists is so that we would choose to capitalize on what they have done. You see, the pain of Pesach and Matsah wasn't the lashes of the Romans or the excruciating pain of crucifixion. It wasn't the trip into hell. It was his people denying that he had done this.
Yeah, I get it.
And there is a solution for that pain. To accept that he has done this. And the pain all goes away. If you don't want your God and your Messiah anguished, embrace what they're offering. On that note, happy Shabat to one of all. I will tell you that my son was just happened to be driving up to his girlfriend's house, and he loves to have long talks when he's in the car driving, and that was probably the answer, although I didn't really hear from Leah, other than she set the phone down and said not to worry. So my guess is that that's what that was. So for those that might be concerned that because they know that my son Blake is covenant, and that I love him, and that if something was wrong, I would be most distracted this evening. But it appears to be nothing more than this is his opportunity to chat, and there is something that is very, very funny that is happening. Not so funny, but it is interesting anyway. I moved to the middle of the Caribbean. My wife wanted me to live with her on St. Croix, because she thought it would be a writer's paradise. And we have created Beret Shamayim, which is the name of our home, here overlooking the Caribbean Sea. And I live in the most beautiful place in the world. And it is a place where I can write 14 hours a day and translate and be just as happy as a lark doing it. But there is something that happens here that people are probably very familiar with, called hurricanes. And for the most part, there's a couple of hurricanes that come through this part of the world every year, and so we are in Hurricane Alley. And I've been here 5 years, and of course, there hasn't even been a good tropical storm that has come through here because, well, the Malak have been busy. It's a part of their job, so we're here in another year, which is the 18th of August, and there is no storm on the horizon that is threatening the Caribbean Sea around where I live. But there is one now that is barreling down on San Diego, California, which is where my youngest son lives. It probably will be either a Cat 1. Right now it's a Cat 4, so it's a major storm. It's a huge, massive storm off the coast of Baja, and it is barreling up the coast, and it's got a bullseye for San Diego. There's never been a hurricane that has hit Southern California. There's been one tropical storm back in 39, I think. 1939 was when it hit, and it was kind of actually a glancing blow, so it actually didn't make landfall. But this sucker is going to make landfall. It will certainly be a tropical storm, may even be a Cat 1 when it hits San Diego. You know, I don't wish San Diego's any harm, but it is interesting that this is happening this year of all places. So,
head off to El Cajon.
Yeah. So I'm sure you're following. It's got to be big news there for you Californians, or when you're up in Carmel. Do Carmelians even think that southern part of the state belongs in the same state? Are you in a completely different zone up there?
Well, these people here don't care about nothing. They're here.
Yeah.
We listen to the news, of course. We're sorry for especially the people and all that.
Yeah, for those who are listening here, that in the 3 or 4 days each year when it's actually sunny and pretty in Carmel, it happens to be the prettiest town in the United States, among the prettiest scenic places to live in the world. And so Kirk, who is and both Sylvia, both marvelous artists, live in the artist capital of the United States in Carmel. The 17-mile drive there, and Pebble Beach and Cypress Point are as lovely as any place in the world in terms of scenic beauty. And I've seen the world, and I can tell you that is my favorite. And Dee is about ready to move from Florida, as I understand it, to Kentucky.
Bluegrass.
Yeah, man, bluegrass state. I lived in Ohio for a number of years, so I know Kentucky well. And it's beautiful countryside. And the nice thing about Kentucky too is that if you can afford to live in Florida, you can live like kings and queens in Kentucky. So, yeah, and I always looked at the degradation of humankind and such that California, it is really bad. I mean, you found a lovely place in California, but California is really bad. It's fallen apart. Washington, Oregon, and those kinds of places, New York City. But Kentucky, you know, it's got to be at least 10, 15 years behind the decline of the rest of the country.
It takes a while for it to catch up.
Yeah, it might be in a kind of a nice little isolated place. You know, I've always said that my best advice for those who, you know, don't want to go to Yisra'el but want to be protected as much as possible from the time of Yaakov's trouble is to not live in metropolitan areas. Going out to the countryside is a much safer place to be. You know, I'm not going to advise against going to Yisra'el. If you are Yehudim, I would love for you to return. But Yisra'el is a tough place to live.
Oh,
and
for sure,
it won't be, but it is now. And so,
you're going to
perhaps
catch the Taruw'ah train.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They need to catch the Towrah train, and you know, I feel like I may live right now in an island in the middle of the Caribbean Sea, but I feel like every day of my life I live it in Yisra'el. I certainly live it for Yisra'el, and that. But actually, physically being there, you know, I have been there. I really don't want to return until Yahweh says you're going to serve as a witness there, because it is so hard on me to look at the Temple Mount and to see the Dome of the Rock and Alaska Mosque there, or the Haredim in their black mourning suits being religious and bowing their heads to Hadrian's Wall, and all of the Catholic rubbish and the fake Estonians claiming that it's Palestine. It's really, really hard. And then you go to a place like Tel Aviv, which is so progressive that it's out of its ever-loving mind. It's a tough, tough place. And then you look at real estate there, and I'm a real estate maven. I love real estate, and I love restoring properties and building properties. And you look at apartments, and I'm not an apartment person. I really like homes because I don't want to walk down long, dingy hallways and park in garages filled with other people's exhaust, and it's just not my thing. I love to wake up in the morning and see things, and to have some privacy and have my family in a home that is as they would say, I like to nest. But in Israel, it's mostly apartments, and they are, well, my study would be about the size of the of the entire apartment, kitchenette and bathrooms and et al. It's the size of a mouse house, and yet they're really expensive, and then utilities are expensive.
Millions.
Oh my, what a terrible burden in terms of the cost. So I'm looking forward to Yahweh's urban renewal. When he does, I'm happy to go back, but I would like to go back at the time of when Yahweh turns Israel back into the conditions experienced in the Garden of Eden.
Well, with all the wealth of your enemies, you'll be living pretty good.
Well, God does like to credit those he works through, no matter how good a job we do or not. He does like to credit those. That's his style. He wants to credit those, and he does like rewarding those who have contributed. And so there's a lot in our covenant family here that are contributing to God's mission and to his people. And there is no denying our Father wants to reward those things. We don't do it for reward, and everyone's going to get a reward. It's just like the 89th Psalm. We all benefit in the same way. But he wouldn't be a father if he did not want to reward his children.
That's
so,
true.
Yes, life will be good. Life is good now.
Will.
Life is good now, and it will be even better. All right. Well, good night to all. Happy Shabat. And we'll celebrate the fact that the 89th Mizmowr wasn't written so much for Dowd, but for us. Let's all capitalize. Good night. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Good night, y'all. Night, Dee.
Good night. Good night, Kirk.